Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. I hope this video finds you well. It has been 3 months since I have made a new video for this channel, so thank you all very much for your patience sticking in there with us. It's just been a completely insane spring. A lot of stuff has happened. I want this to be a video where I don't start rambling right away, so we're not going to get into it right now. Suffice it to say, here I am, and I'm excited, and today we are talking about Man on the Brink. Hell, yes, this film was released in 1981. It was released, I believe, on the 8th of January, 1981, so right there at the start of the year. This is the Connie releasing Blu-ray. So Connie is a Vinegar Syndrome partner label, and they released Bullets Over Summer. They released Spacked Out. They released Viva Erotica, I believe, so some other Hong Kong stuff. And this release came out this year in 2024. This is going to be like more of an overview than like a detailed in-depth review. So that's the slipcase here, which is embossed and like really nice, heavy. Like, you know, the Vinegar Syndrome slipcases are always really, really nice. And like I said, they're a Vinegar Syndrome partner label. So they're working with the same, I guess, printers, or I don't know, Connie's acquiring the films and putting together the releases, but Vinegar Syndrome is having them made. I don't know exactly how that works, but it does feel and look very much like a Vinegar Syndrome release when you have it in your hands. This movie was directed by Alex Chung, and so I watched this movie at like the end of February, beginning of March. Like, it really has literally been about 3 months since I watched this film, and so because of that, this is going to be more of like my impressions of this film, a recommendation of this film, more so than like a really long detailed review. And I will also talk about the material that is on the release here. I love it. I love the smell of the booklets. This one is no exception. So this is Cops and Robbers on the Brink. Alex Chung, New Wave Crime Stylist by John Charles. So there's your essay there. And this is the director. There he is. Chilling out with the reel, see? With the film itself, the actual celluloid. So a good like nutshell kind of one sentence or 2 sentence review of this movie for anyone who's just kind of like interested in knowing my overall thoughts and then moving on with their lives. And there's some really great behind the scenes stuff here. Like, this handheld camera rig is so cool. It's just that picture of him. And then, yeah, some really good behind the scenes stuff. So what did I think about this movie? I loved this movie. I put this movie in my IMDb, or not IMDb, excuse me, my Letterboxd top 4 right after I watched it. I am a huge fan of undercover cop movies, which is what this is. This is a very, very early, obviously since it came out in January of 1981, 1980s Hong Kong undercover cop film that really feels more like a 70s movie to me. Or, you know, like, I mean, you know, the beginning of a decade is always kind of the transition from the previous decade, but this feels to me very much like a very early 80s / mid to late 70s crime film, like French Connection, stuff like Coppola was doing, Scorsese, like that type of stuff. It's a really gritty, grounded, like on the street kind of realist undercover cop crime drama. I would go so far as to say that this movie belongs in the same class of undercover cop films from Hong Kong as City on Fire and Infernal Affairs, which are my 2. Those are like the 2 when I think of like what are the greatest, and I guess Hard Boiled is an undercover cop film too, right? So I guess it's kind of those 3 as like the holy trinity of Hong Kong undercover cop films. And I really think that this belongs in that same tier of films. I wouldn't say that it's quite as good as City on Fire, which I think is just like the bee's knees and one of the greatest movies ever made. I think a lot of people would not say that it's on the same level as Hard Boiled. It's a very different film than Hard Boiled. You know, John Woo is very like maximalist with the violence, with the operatic emotions and stuff like that. And this is, like I said, much more of like a gritty, grounded kind of realist type of film. And in that way, I think it does have more in common with Ringo Lam's films than it does with John Woo films. But this is just a really, really stellar, fantastic film. It's extremely well made. The camera work is fantastic. The acting is really, really good. It's got a really good script. It's got a really kind of fascinating, deep, probing examination into the psychological state of someone who is going undercover, and their personality and their kind of view of reality is starting to like fracture and fragment and stuff like that. It also did remind me of Long Arm of the Law. Now, obviously, Long Arm of the Law is not an undercover movie. It's about a gang of criminals from mainland China who they're soldiers, ultimately, from mainland China, who decide to rob like a jewelry store in Hong Kong as like this one big final payday. And then they're going to go back and like, retire to their village in China where they can live for the rest of their lives off of the money they could rob from a jewelry store in Hong Kong. But it has that same really gritty, grounded, like early 80s, like I said, sense of like realistic drama. And also, like coming out of the 1970s, you had this kind of era when directors and filmmakers were really empowered and producers were willing to believe in the individual unique visions of directors and filmmakers and give them a lot of creative freedom. And so you see a lot of like really innovative and interesting camera work and themes and subject matter because you're kind of freed from the restrictions of like, you have to do this, you have to do this. The studio is telling you they won't give you the money unless you do it this way. And obviously there's independent filmmaking happening around that time too and stuff like that. But when you read about the cinema of the 1970s, and I'm talking primarily about the United States, but when you read about the cinema of the 1970s, you have people like Coppola, people like, Spielberg was coming up then, Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Hal Ashby, Roman Polanski, like a lot of those people were given a lot of creative freedom by people like Bob Evans, right, who is the guy who was, I think, running Paramount at the time, who was working with Coppola and all these incredible filmmakers. And you see that in this film of like a producer and a system that is trusting the vision of this filmmaker. And it's just a really stellar, fantastic film. Now, if you watch films because you like really well choreographed action, violence, fighting, like this, that's not what this is. Like this is a gritty, realistic film where violence is kind of ugly, clumsy. It kind of comes and goes in these bursts. And the editing can be kind of frantic. And the concluding scene in this film where the main character gets stuck in like this locked down apartment building and there's all this confusion about like his identity and is he a criminal, is he like who is he, and there's all these like enraged citizens like in this apartment building and there's this sense of just like total frenzy and chaos and like mob violence, almost like French Revolution, like running through the streets decapitating people, but it's done in this really organic, natural way. It's so like the conclusion of this film is so good because it works fantastically from a dramatic standpoint, but it's also like really incredible filmmaking. There's just so many sequences and scenes in this film that are so well done. As someone like, I love cinema not only because I love cinematic storytelling, because I love being immersed in the worlds and being able to travel around the world to places like Hong Kong through watching films. But I also love it because I love the technique and the form of cinema. I love moving camera. I love the use of music, really phenomenal music in this film. There's some really, really great, almost like documentary style stuff in this movie of just like what is happening in Hong Kong at the time. Who are the people there? What are they doing? What are their lives? What is the culture of the city? And again, I mean, not to harp on the 1970s American cinema thing too, but you see that like in The Godfather. The Godfather is a movie that really kind of moves at a pace of life. And Godfather 2, right? You look at the scenes that take place with Vito Corleone, like in the whatever 1917 or whatever that timeline takes place, 1918, and you see New York City as it was at that time. Like there's a shot of him walking down the street delivering groceries. And you just see like all the vegetable stalls and the people and like what they're doing and who they are and what their lives are like. There's not this sense of like rushing from plot point to plot point. There's this sense of like the city is a character. The place is very important to these people and to their lives, and it becomes an inseparable element of the dramatic kind of engine of the film, if you want to call it that. So I'm gonna look really quickly at my notes here, and I did take notes when I was watching this film. I emailed them to myself. I'm looking at my computer right now to see if there's anything that I think is probably worth mentioning in a review that I haven't talked about yet. I said the music is awesome. Oh, so it reminded me a little bit of the story of Wu Viet. So if you're looking for an other film in terms of a comparison of tone, technique, the look of the film, the feel of the film, I think that's a pretty good comparison. That type of bleakness, violence, the way that film, much like this film, and I think much like the best heroic bloodshed films, this is one of my favorite genres of films, right? Like I love Ringo Lam. I love movies like I mean, from Ringo Lam, like Wild Search, City on Fire, but you have movies like first Tiger Cage, especially, I thought was freaking incredible. And you have the John Woo films, A Better Tomorrow is one of my favorite movies. Obviously, you have The Killer, you have Hard Boiled, Tragic Hero, Rich and Famous, right? But like, I think the best of those films, and one of the things that makes that genre so unique, is they're essentially making dramas that take place in worlds of violence and constant tension. And so that adds an action thriller element to the movie, but it is at its core a human drama. And the story of Wu Viet is very much that too. And so are, like, there's a movie like The Godfather. So, and I'm just, like I said, there's an Empire Strikes Back poster in the background of this movie, which I thought was really freaking cool. So look out for that if you're a big Star Wars nerd. There's a great armored truck robbery scene, which I wrote in here. Oh, and there's another scene that I thought this was a really interesting narrative device. There's a scene where one of the characters is like setting up a job, and he's drunk at the time. So then there's this ambiguity around, like, he's like really drunk. Is he gonna remember what he's doing? Does he know that there's a job going on? Like, does he know he's supposed to be like in character undercover doing this? Like, it creates this sense of tension and ambiguity within the narrative, because he becomes unreliable because he's really drunk at the time. That was really interesting. There's also a really great scene in this little like stone house where these criminals who survive, there's like a sting operation by the cops. Basically, some of them get killed and captured, and some of them escape. And the ones who escape all end up in this little house together. And I think there's 3 or 4 of them. They know that one of them is the cop, but they don't know who it is. And the paranoia and violence of that scene and the tension of it is incredible. So the bonus material here, there's a 40-minute long interview with the director, which is incredible. He talks about the Hong Kong New Wave. He talks about Cops and Robbers, which was his first film. I have not seen that film. I'm going to rush to see it now that I've seen this, because it's a really highly regarded film, and I think it's kind of similar to this movie. He talks about how the studios, so this is just a note I wrote to myself. I don't know if I can remember what he was really talking about, but I'm going to read this to you. He talks about how the studios were full, so they had to just go out on the streets and make stuff because they couldn't get space anywhere. So they couldn't get studio space, is what I wrote to myself. Like, they couldn't rent a studio in which to make a film. So they had to just go out onto the street and make movies. And he says that freed him up a lot as a filmmaker, and it made his directing a lot more hands-on and changed the way that he directed films and created a more intimate relationship with the actors and stuff like that. He talks about working in TV and how there's a lot of freedom in that, and having such a big audience is also really helpful, because TV obviously has a really big audience. There's interesting character analysis and story analysis and talking about the psychology of characters. I wrote to myself, this is a really incredible interview. So there's an 1 and 15-minute long post-screening conversation with the director, and he talks about doing his own cinematography. There's an amazing panel conversation the director is on this panel, if I remember correctly, and then there are other industry people from Hong Kong cinema, like maybe producers, directors, actors, talking about the industry and the film. I mean, the bonus material on here is freaking incredible. That's bottom line what you need to know. And then there's a 14-minute behind the scenes thing that was shot on 8mm film by assistant director Teddy Chang, that was scanned and provided by the director of the film. And this is like fly on the wall, like behind the scenes 8mm footage of them just making the film and seeing like how they did that. And I'm sorry, there's a phone ringing right now, if you can hear that. But there you go. So that's some information about that. And then there's 1 minute of behind the scenes footage from CID, which is a TV show that the director of this film worked on. But that's basically it. There's your quick overview of the release and the film, Man on the Brink. Here's part of the slipcover. I can't really see myself. I'm like filming on my phone, but like, as you can see, it's very bright outside. So it's so bright that I'm having trouble seeing. I'm having trouble seeing the phone. So I hope that you can see the slipcase here and see how awesome and red and colorful and amazing it is. But this is really just a fantastic film and a fantastic release, and I highly recommend it. My name is Will. You're watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I also have to say huge shout out to our patrons, because that was bought with Patreon money, and I should have put that at the front of the video, but what can I say? It's been 3 months since I made a video. I'm getting back in the saddle. I'm getting back in the swing of things. Let me know in the comments what you think about this film, what you think about this release, whether you saw any poppy seeds in my teeth, because I did have a poppy seed bagel for breakfast, and we will see you next time.